Let's talk about jobs for a second. One of the weird things about getting a full-time job here in corporate America is that you basically have to learn an entirely new language. It's still English, at least mostly in the US, but there's a group of words and phrases that people use that only make sense when used at work. And there's kind of a lot of them. You know what, let's let Simba take the lead on this. I don't know, I think this product needs to be more disruptive. Do you think this could fit all in our product ecosystem? You know, we could follow up with this offline. You know, sometimes we just have to go for the low-hanging fruit. Ah, I see. I think this has a really good chance of moving the needle. You think this offering is customer-centric enough? I mean, the customer is always right. You know, give me a second, I'll ping you in a few minutes about this. You know, let's take a step back and look at this from 10,000 feet. Yeah, don't worry, I'll circle back with you on that one tomorrow. And for many people, having to speak like that at work can be frustrating. But a lot of us still end up doing it because it's part of the expectation of showing up to work. And it's not just work. We end up creating and using special words and phrases in other parts of our lives as well. And as you might have guessed, the furry fandom is filled with words and acronyms and sayings that only make sense to other furries. I have always been fascinated by this idea of talking like a furry essentially being like speaking another language, using words that have completely different meanings outside of the furry fandom. So that's what we're going to tackle today, though we're not going to look at what these furry words and phrases are. Instead, we're going to tackle why they exist in the first place. Why do furries speak the way they do? What's the significance of having to learn all of these words? And more importantly, why learning how to speak like a furry should be one of the first things that people do when joining the fandom. If you know anything about the furry fandom, you know that there are a lot of things that furries do that can be seen only within the fandom itself. Things like coming up with a fursona, wearing fursuits, and even attending furry-specific conventions are all unique to this fandom and things that you won't find anywhere else. And that makes sense, as these are some of the defining features of the fandom itself. If you take any random person and show them a group of fursuiters frolicking outside in public, even if it wasn't true or not, they would definitely say something along the lines of, Yep, those are furries, all right. And there are a lot more of these things that furries do or make that are defining features of the fandom. But one of the strongest examples of this idea is something that we do so commonly, we don't even realize when we're doing it. It's how furries talk to each other. Now, the idea that furries speak to each other differently than they would with other non-furries is not such a crazy notion. We change how we speak or text with other people all the time based on our relationship with them. I don't know about you, but there's no way I'm sending my boss an uwu or a :3 in a message to them, something I'm much more comfortable doing with my furry friends. But what's interesting about the furry fandom in particular is not only do furries talk to each other in a certain way, but they also have their own language that they use when talking to each other as well. Now, it's not an entirely new language like English or Japanese, but there's a certain group of words and phrases and acronyms that furries use that only makes sense when used in the context of the furry fandom. Most of the time, furries change the meaning of words that are already well known, like turning the word furry from an adjective to a noun. Or we do something like adding or changing the prefix to words to give them a furry spin, like fursona or fursuit. This isn't some big revelation either. In fact, there are a bunch of videos about furry words and phrases that you should definitely check out, but only when you're done watching this one in full. Trust me, those videos aren't going anywhere. Now, a lot of those videos call this group of words and phrases furry slang, when technically they're closer to furry lingo, since what we're talking about here is the vocabulary of a particular group of people, furries in this case. But that's besides the point. All of them do a good job introducing you to some of the most common words that are important to know as a furry. And I do mean it when I say they are important to know. Furry speak might seem like something silly and fun, but not knowing what these words mean can end up being one of the most alienating things keeping people from participating in the furry fandom. If you think about it, the language that furries use is implicitly one of the biggest gatekeepers of the fandom itself, and it's expected that newer furries pick up on it quickly so they can participate in some of the most crucial aspects of being a furry. Now, a lot of them are pretty easy to figure out, like making a fursona or going to a fur con, but not all of them are that straightforward. Take ref sheet, for example. If I want to get any sort of art of my fursona, the first thing that almost every artist in this fandom will ask for is a ref sheet of my fursona. And while it makes total sense to furries who have been in the fandom for a while, Out of context, the words ref sheet don't give away too many clues to someone new to the fandom of what that is. Oh cool, I made it to the commission queue. Wait, they're asking for a ref sheet? Well, what is this sheet supposed to be referencing? Is this a literal sheet of paper I'm somehow supposed to give to them? Am I referring to the sheet, or is this sheet referring to something else? So yes, while it may feel silly, furry lingo is actually a pretty important thing for furries to know and understand. But it does seem like a lot, doesn't it? Why do furries have to go through this process of learning what is essentially a new language just to participate in the very basics of the furry fandom? Well, it all comes down to self-identification. If you think about it, talking like a furry is a core part of identifying as a furry itself. Knowing how to converse with other members of this fandom is the most direct way of confirming to you and the person you're talking to that you are also a furry, or at least well-versed in furry culture. It serves as a source of affirmation that we are part of the in-group of the furry fandom, and while there are no true barriers to entry into this fandom, a very easy way for others to recognize you as one is to use their language. And this isn't some new idea that is specific to the furry fandom. Most of us probably don't even realize it, but we use domain-specific language all the time, even in our non-furry everyday lives. Whether it's at work or at school, or even when talking about other hobbies and interests, all of those have their own lingo that we naturally use in conversation. And just like furry lingo, a lot of those words would only make sense in that given context, otherwise they would sound like gibberish to someone not in the in-group of that domain. And there are so many examples of this, like if you were at my house during a Saturday afternoon in the fall and overheard me say, "Come on, come on. Ooh, nice, nice. Yeah, they should definitely run a play action here on 2nd and 5. It'll easily put them in the field goal range." You would probably have no idea what any of that means if you weren't into American football. Or if you were hanging at my place while I was working at home and overheard me say something along the lines of, "I think this looks good. Only thing is, I think this HTTP call to the REST API should be a put request instead of a post request. But other than that, LGTM, I'll merge your PR into main right after those fixes." That only makes any sort of sense if you're a software engineer. Otherwise, it sounds like utter nonsense. And the same thing applies to the furry fandom. For example, when I'm at a furry convention and need to find the headless lounge after fursuiting for a while, if I asked someone who wasn't familiar with that term, they would be mildly confused at best, maybe even a little concerned as well. But the main point here is that all these specific terms and lingo that furries use are just part of being a furry, just as much as making a fursona. How we use words can mean completely different things depending on the context, and using certain ones in the context of the furry fandom correctly signifies that we know enough about the furry culture to converse with other fandom members. Now, thankfully, unlike other lingo, furry lingo is pretty easy to pick up and understand. Just spend some time around other furries and you'll end up figuring out the meaning of things simply based on context clues. And for the less obvious ones, you can always ask. Most furries would be more than happy to explain things to you. And again, I know this all might seem like a meaningless or unimportant thing to spend time understanding, but I would argue the opposite. Speaking like a furry is one of the most furry things one can do. It's a direct differentiator to see who's familiar with the furry fandom or not, and allows you to actually enjoy all of the things this fandom has to offer. Honestly, I wish we had more, and I'm sure we'll get more in the future as this fandom grows and the culture changes with the times. But for now, go ahead and learn the lingo or slang or whatever you want to call it and speak like a furry. If you're talking with another anthropomorphic animal enthusiast, trust me, they'll know what you're saying. Anyways, that's been it. Thank you all for watching. I'll catch you in the next one, but until then, stay wild out there. Peace.